Hi, welcome to Chapter 4 of the Parenting Connection. Today we're going to talk about play and we're going to talk about emotions. So far in our series, in Chapter 1, we covered the temperaments and how we're all individually different, while we do, of course, have similarities. And then in Chapter 2, we talked about parenting styles, climates in the home, and how those also are unique and which sort of traditions we want to bring with us and what we want to leave behind. In Chapter 3, we talked a lot about child development, and we talked about the 5 types of development. There was the physical, intellectual, social, emotional, and spiritual. And today, we're going to talk a little bit more about the emotions as it relates to children, and we're going to talk about play. So, I can't wait to get started. So after our last session, we had a question about child development. Am I really, as a parent, expected to know all of my children's ages and stages of development and all these 5 different areas and how that impacts them? It sounds complicated, but really it's not that complicated. My sister-in-law once pointed out to me that as parents, we seem to have this ability to focus exactly on where our children are at developmentally, and to sort of block out what came before and what's coming toward us. The other thing is that as you have more children, you start to get used to the different stages of development because you've seen it before. And the parts that we talk about, their physical development, their intellectual development, these are things that just occur naturally, whether we notice them or not. And so what we are sort of asking you to do is, if you have a concern or a curiosity, is to find out about it. Either by reading something in a book. We have the internet now. You have to be a little bit careful because you don't always know, what's out there or what people are focusing on, or if you agree with that. It's important always to maintain your own sense of your own children, your own sense of your own thinking, your own values, your own thoughts and beliefs. But being open to learning more about what normally happens, what the sequence is, where your particular child is. Some kids go through certain phases faster, some slower, and just respecting the uniqueness of each child while informing yourself about, what are some of the normal things that you can expect. I think you'll be fine.
All right, so let's talk about play. Before I start, I should probably tell you I've been a teacher for 20 years. I've taught in private schools. I've taught in public schools. I've been in summer camps. I've seen a lot of different areas where kids get to play and work. And so, I've seen a fair amount in my time. And I think, in a way, what we're going to talk about now, we're going to defend the importance of play. And it almost seems a little bit of a shame that we have to do that. Because play is something that is so natural to kids and probably, has been, maybe for as long as people have been around.
Sure.
So at Harvard, there's a place called the Center for the Developing Child. And one of the big things they talk about there is this new thing called executive function. And there's a lot of research about this. And what this means is that this is an ability that people have to keep calm, remember instructions, focus their attention, achieve their goals, and especially control their impulses. So, the brain has a lot to do during the course of the day. Like if you think of your kids when they're at school, there's a lot they have to keep their eye on and try to manage. And kids aren't really born with any of these skills. This executive function, it's there in everyone as a potential, but they're not born with it, so they have to develop it. And the thing is, if a kid grows up in a home where there's constant stress, what we're calling toxic stress nowadays, that actually, they're finding it changes the architecture of the brain. So kids that don't have all the advantages, it is in many ways almost impossible for them to control themselves, focus, do what they need to do. And then unfortunately, instead of giving those kids support, oftentimes what happens in school is they get punished or criticized. Play is one of the big ways that kids process their feelings and experiences. They don't have the words many times. I mean, we definitely want to teach them to identify their feelings and express them, but that's difficult for them. It's often difficult for adults to really do well. And a lot of times we're not encouraged to do that. So, playing is really how kids are going to work it out. That's how they're going to do that. So when kids feel safe, they'll start to play. And that's a good sign. We want them playing. If we may see difficult things in their play too if we're observing. We may see some violence, and that's not necessarily bad. Again, their anger and their sadness, this is where they get a chance to show that. And if one character is beating up on another character, they may have to play that out to express that.
Right, and they're playing it. They're not beating. Of course, we're not advocating that they beat another child. I mean, play always has to be supervised lightly to make sure that there's no serious injuries or going way outside the bound. And we also know that kids under the age of 6 learn primarily through imitation. So if there's a play that's really, really rough, or there's a lot of curse words or things being used that you don't approve of, you have to ask yourself, what are they being exposed to that's causing them to mimic that?
Sure, and we don't want to say that their anger is not okay or their sadness is not okay, because what we know is that it doesn't go away. They have to come to grips with it somehow and try to figure it out and feel like they have some control over it and like they can express it. Now, like we're saying, if a kid is starting fires or there's aggression against the family dog or hitting their siblings, that's probably not okay, and we have to be there to catch it, to see it, and have ways to limit their behavior. Not everything is okay. We're not saying that.
Right.
So it's certainly within reason here. And if a kid is showing a lot of those violent behaviors, maybe they need help from outside the home. Maybe it's something that we need help to address as a family. A lot of this has to do with how we as adults process our own feelings, and what are we modeling to them, like you said. If we, sometimes as parents we're afraid to let our kids express that anger because we might be afraid that, well, if I let them express that anger, then they'll try to take over. If I give them an inch, they'll take a yard. And it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. We can learn to allow their expression of anger within limits, because in a way, that's something natural to them and they need it. And then we can give them a little bit of power by giving them choices, and we've talked about that before. And all those things are important.
And as you say, through play, their executive function develops, and that's what allows them to start to control their own impulses. So a 2-year-old doesn't really understand that another child is being hurt when they hit them with a shovel that they just picked up.
Yeah.
Whereas a 10-year-old, is older and more aware and more mature. And so they're likely not to be quite as aggressive. If they are aggressive, then that means that they have a lot of feelings building up within themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And that, as Jim said, then you're going to want to think about where that's coming from or start to inquire about it.
So my 2-year-old whacks my 4-year-old with a shovel. What are you telling me to do?
Put the shovel away.
And there's nothing wrong with my 2-year-old.
That's right. The 2-year-old doesn't understand the same way an older child would.
And even if they do, chances are they don't have the impulse control to stop themselves. It's automatic with them. They don't really mean it per se.
Or even
they're just going to do it.
Or if they do mean it, they don't understand how destructive that could be. And that's why you never let kids of that age with younger children or children that can't defend themselves without close supervision.
Right, and know what's around them, right? make sure there aren't damaging things like knives and things around that they could accidentally get into.
Right.
So what about other kinds of play? Things like music lessons or any kind of lesson, sports activities, like
Is
aren't-
that play, Jim?
well, some people might think it is. If the kid is playing soccer, it looks like play. Football, basketball, organized activities like that. If you think of that as play, playing your violin or something like that.
That's very different than the type of play we're talking about, isn't it?
That's right. Kids, especially as they get older, we may want them to learn all these skills, like these extracurricular activities, and they can be a great thing. And then nowadays, things like STEM or STEAM, we want to sign our kids up for these different activities that are going to enrich them. And those can be really good things. But what we're really talking about and arguing for is what we call free play.
And what's the danger of filling your kids' schedules with a lot of adult supervised activities?
Because then they're really missing out on the opportunity for this free play, where they can relax, where they can use their imagination, where really they're in control to decide how things are going to go.
And you're saying that executive function is developed through free play, not through organized adult supervised activities.
That's right. And the thing is, and maybe we think back to a couple generations ago where kids would play pickup games of baseball or basketball. Those things are actually great too, because there's no adult there to tell kids what to do. So if they want to play, they have to learn to follow the rules. They have to learn to control their own impulses. See, it's actually what they want to do. They want to play a sport, because that's what they want to do. And the free play is really about them exploring their imaginative world. And we need to give them time to do this. Think at least 45 minutes or more.
Well, I've read studies say that it takes 45 minutes just for them to get into deep free play. And so if you have a really busy schedule, or if you don't make that time and space for your kids to play uninterrupted, it's going to be hard for them to sort of develop those brain muscles. And the other thing to know is it comes so naturally. If you give them the tools to play and the space and time to play, they will do it naturally. You don't have to worry about instructing that.
Another thing is the space. It's important that they have a space to play in. And you have to figure this out in your own home. Is it going to be a certain area where they're more free to play and have their things? It's good that it not be too controlled, that they can get a little messy and really explore.
And it's interesting that kids who are young, when we talk about child development, they tend to want to be close to their parent. So their play space should be where you're going to be, somewhere in a corner near you. Whereas when they're older, they want more independence and more privacy, so then they're going to want to put their space more away from you.
That makes sense.
And that's normal. Yeah. And so you sort of have to respect those different stages. You might not like your downstairs having toys around, but realistically, that's where your small children are going to want to play.
On this topic of them playing and wanting to play near you, again, it's important that they can get a little messy and explore. So allowing a space maybe in the living room, if that's where you guys spend a lot of time, where they can have their toys. And granted, you can teach them to clean up after they're done playing and put things away. Figure out what works for you. But if you've ever painted anything or made a scrapbook, at some point they're going to want to explore scissors and glue. Find ways to make that doable. And again, you can help them learn how to clean up when they're done. But that exploration and creation, that's important.
Yeah, I know my sister-in-law, they had art night once a week, every Tuesday night, and one of the friends of the family would come over and they would just cover the whole dining room table and they would just make things. And you can create that type of play that's still unstructured, but it sort of becomes a family event.
You could take part, and that's an important point too, is you never want to have this sense that, well, I never really know what my child is playing. That's their business and they'll just do that. It is important to watch them play. Not every day. You don't have to watch them play like a hawk, but you want to have a sense of what they're playing.
Well, that's another benefit, that if they're playing nearby you, you can sort of overhear a little bit what what kind of conversations they're making up or what kind of themes are coming up in their play.
Yeah, it's a great window onto what's going on in their mind. Like you could be looking for them, like if there is something violent coming out, like, oh, that's interesting. But just to know what they're interested in too.
Yeah, it's interesting. There was a little boy in our program, and he had a lot of trouble regulating himself and keeping himself calm. So sometimes we would take him aside and we would play with him as if we were children. And he would often direct the play because in real life, he was kindergarten age, he didn't really have much power. And so what I noticed was, and we talked about this, kids play their experiences. He would always be the teacher. We would be at recess. We would all be playing, and then he would, start snapping his fingers and blowing his pretend whistle and telling everyone line up. And he liked to sort of tell us what to do. Why? Because that's what he experienced every day. People telling him what to do. So now he wanted to relive that, but he wants to be in charge.
My turn.
And that's what play does. It allows kids to experience different roles and power and sort of make it come out the way they think it should come out.
That's right, and that's where the free part of free play is so important. They're free to explore their own wishes and
Yes.
their own experiences. Mm-hmm. And that's where they want to start creating. Should we talk a minute about electronics?
Sure.
It's a really important thing nowadays. That it wasn't very important when you and I were growing up, but nowadays it's very important.
Right, and I think, earlier you talked about kids should be allowed to sort of explore and do whatever they want, and that's true. But there's a little bit of a side note. Electronics are very addictive. If you have a phone and you're hooked into social media or people text you a lot, you start to understand that you are constantly wanting to check on your phone, see who's there. It's a social sort of an interaction, and yet it's not this type of involved imaginative free play that we're talking about. So probably if your child really, really loves electronics, you're going to have to put some limits around that. And the younger they are, the bigger the limits. Small children are probably, if you're using screen time for them, television, computer, phones, it's pretty much all the same.
If you're giving your kid the phone all the time to play with, try to start to limit it. See if you can dial it back a little bit.
Find other ways of distracting them, and eventually you're going to want them to be able to soothe themselves. And so while electronics are here to stay and they're not going away, there needs to be a balance. And I would say for small children, well, they recommend for like children under the age of 3 that they not really have any screen time. That may be unrealistic for you, but you should really think seriously about giving them little bits of exposure and allowing that to get bigger as they get older.
What about my own child at the age of 14 who finds play on his electronic or her electronic device? They're playing with their friends through some kind of a game on the web, and they are talking to each other through their mics. Is that the same as them meeting outside and playing a game under a tree somewhere?
Well, if you think about the types of development, there's an intellectual and an emotional and a social element to that type of play. What there isn't is any type of physical motion. So that kind of play is fine. There needs to be a balance. So if your child loves video games and they're older and they sort of manage themselves pretty well, as long as they are getting other things done in their world that they need to, and if they're getting outside, moving around, riding bike, or finding something physical to do that isn't just sitting in front of a screen, I think that's going to be really important.
And we're not saying go up to your adolescent, take away all their devices. That would create World War III.
Right, that's not necessary. And by that, we talked about development. By the age of 14, if you've had an ongoing relationship with them, and if you've been sort of teaching them about the importance of different kinds of activities, they're probably going to be reasonable, and you can sort of negotiate with them. What do they think would be a reasonable limit?
So I think that's our big point, is that free play is the important thing. That's what we're trying to encourage. We're not trying to say all the other forms of play are bad or not as good. Free play is very valuable. And if you're watching your kid and you have a sense that they're doing some free play, that That's great, and we want to encourage more of that. And any kind of limiting of electronics, hopefully, is just trying to encourage more of, free play or free expression, free creation. That's what we're trying to encourage.
Building things, it can be artistic. I mean,
Right.
taking music lessons is different than trying to play around on the instrument because you're enjoying yourself. And so there's a
Right.
distinction between, again, directed activity and play.
Right, and it really, a lot of it is about health.
Yes, what's healthy?
What's really going to be, healthy for kids? That's what we're trying to increase at least a little bit.
So last time when we talked about child development, and we mentioned it a little bit today with play, we talked about the 5 different aspects of child development, and one of those is emotional. And we talked about how our culture tends to not value emotions. They're seen as weak or not serious or not useful. And that's actually not true. Emotions are part of us, and they're incredibly necessary. Sometimes they're clues as to people crossing over boundaries that shouldn't be crossed, or sometimes they're clues within ourselves of challenges that we need to take on. But the thing about emotions is they're like weather. They come and go. They don't stay. And I'd like to talk about that very personally for a minute. So Jim and I and Joe have been working very closely together. There's a quarantine that's been going on. There's a lot of societal upheaval for good reasons. And there's a certain amount of pressure that's sort of on from the outside, and having to create these videos and not really being so confident. And so yesterday, Jim and I actually got into an argument.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we both felt the other wasn't really doing their best, or that we didn't think the other person understood that we were doing our best, and we were afraid that our best wasn't good enough.
Yeah, sometimes the pressure or the anxiety, it makes us feel uncertain, and so we blame ourselves, or we blame another person. Like, well,
Right.
maybe I'm not the problem, maybe you're the problem. And so you can feel just upset, and then you're trying to figure out, wow, what's the problem? Who's the problem? And it's confusing, and you feel it makes it hard to think because you can become very emotional.
That's right. And all these emotions start to pile up. Feeling guilty, feeling disappointed, feeling not good enough. And the more those emotions start to get strong, they sort of build. And then you start to think of all the other things that make you feel bad. And then by the end of it, you just feel terrible.
Chances are, when something important happens to us, we get emotional, we get upset, oftentimes you ever hear this term baggage? It triggers something from your past, right? And we all have a past. And in that sense, we all have baggage. We all have these emotional things that got set up when we were younger. And chances are, those things are going to come back again and again, the same issues, and you have to try to deal with them again and again. And sometimes they're so overwhelming that when they come up, we just either shut down or we have a fight and then we leave, and we just think this is the one thing that I can't deal with.
That's right. And so, again, feelings change. And so what happens is you sort of go away and you sort of think about things and you feel your feelings. And as time passes, it tends to sort of bring back your perspective. And so we were able to come back together then, talk about what
we knew that we need a little time maybe to cool down, think about it.
But then we talked about, each of our own perspectives, what we were feeling, and we realized that we're both really very happy about what the other is doing for the most part. No, we're not going to be perfect, which is fine, and no one's perfect, even the people that appear perfect. And on top of that we really want the same thing. And so we're just going to keep going with our work and not let our emotions decide for us what kind of decisions we're going to make.
And this is really real, because if you're with another person in your life who's important to you, or you're with your kids, stuff is going to come up and you're going to get upset. And can you recognize that and maybe, okay, I need to take a step back, whatever you need to do to try and calm down before maybe you do something or say something that you might regret later.
That's right. And so what does this have to do with play?
Yeah.
Well, emotions are very important. They're very important because they're a part of how our brain functions, and they enter into how we relate to other people in our relationships. So, how do we help our children deal with feelings? Free play is a place that kids go to play out their experiences. So if people are arguing a lot in the house, you're probably going to see the play reflect that. If people are threatening each other, you're going to see the play reflect that. If people are helping each other or having celebrations together, the play will reflect that. And so part of what you're allowing children to play through is the life experience that we all go through, and that's really necessary. The other thing that kids do with their feelings is they act them out, like in temper tantrums, throwing things, hitting things, what's called meltdowns. What we can do with that is it's called co-regulation, where you give them their space and you remain a presence for them. The more upset they are, the less you want to get into their space and the less that you want to use words. But as they calm down, you can find words that can help to soothe them and help identify what they're feeling. So that's the last part I really want to talk about. There's many, many, many words for feelings, and we're going to we're going to put some up here on the screen. And let me just read a few of these feelings. And since we're good at labeling objects for kids. This is a cup, this is a ball, this is a spoon. But what about feelings? Here are some words that really express feelings. Shocked, heartbroken, disappointed, confident, invisible, disgusted, worthless. When you start to use these words to help your children identify those feelings, and when you use those words yourself to identify your own feelings, it teaches children that these feelings can be spoken about. And why is that important? Because when you speak about your feelings to another human being, you start to feel better, and those feelings start to shrink down a little bit or become a little bit more balanced. And as we talked about before, as Jim and I talked about how we were feeling yesterday and what was behind it, we started to feel relaxed, and now we're, back to where we normally are, which is just two people working together to...
It's hopeful because it shows that no matter how difficult it is, you can try to repair it and come back, and many times come back stronger.
Right, and according to Bruce Perry, relationship and trust, and let me just remind you that Bruce Perry is the founder of the Child Trauma Academy and the Neurosequential Model of Therapeutics, which is a way of looking at brain functioning and how it impacts relationship and people's ability to function in the world. And what we learned from him is that trust and relationship are built on what's called rupture and repair. We get upset, we sort of move away from each other, and then we come back and we work it out. And that's what builds trust. And so whether it's through play or through sitting with your children when they're upset and giving them some space and then helping them put words to it later, these are all ways that help us build our relationships. So one thing that we do in our parenting class with the parents is that we do a lot of reading, and we give them books sometimes, and during one of the sessions we hand out little bookmarks, and those bookmarks have on them either some words of encouragement or something that relates to that person individually. The word encouragement means to give courage. And courage is really, really important to be able to function and thrive as a human being on this planet. So through using words that are real and honest and positive to describe what you see in another person and to notice that is incredibly encouraging. And I'm going to show you or read to you one of our little bookmarks and think about how this impacts other people when you're able to use these types of words. Repeat after me. I am strong. I am special. I can do anything. Sometimes life throws hurdles in our path, but we just have to keep on going full speed ahead, looking inside ourselves for the courage to leap over them and never look back. Always believe in yourself as much as others believe in you. And those types of words that we say to each other or our children help to cement those relationships and help us feel better about ourselves and other people. So when we hand these out to people, people do different things with them. Some people put them on their dresser so that every morning they wake up and they remember this. Other people have come back to me and said, I keep this in my wallet and I pull it out whenever I start to feel a little down. It really helps me. So these are things that you can use to encourage yourself and to know that it comes from someone else who values you. So next time, we're going to talk about something that Jim brought up a little while ago when we were talking about an argument. We all have baggage. We all have feelings that get triggered from our past for a variety of reasons, and it's different for everyone. But one thing that remains the same is the way that our brain functions. So next time, we're going to talk about trauma and things that have happened to us in our lives, and particularly at children, that really impact the way that we feel and think and relate to others. And I think it's going to be really
It'll be
interesting.
exciting. Yeah.
So we'll see you next time for Chapter 5. Thanks for coming again.